I want to come to you first, Irina. I think a lot of nitty-gritties of that bill are still not clear as of today. While lawmakers and people are divided in the UK, we are still to know how big or how difficult will the bill be to implement.
I think there's going to be a lot of contention about this. We've had similar laws on a state level in the United States, and they were very controversial. I think what matters here is that it does require the patient to be certified terminally ill and only have 6 months to live, which makes it somewhat less contentious than some other European and Canadian bills, which essentially allow euthanasia for anyone who asks and does not require the extensive level of certification as the UK law. Still, even in that light, there's likely to be concerns about a potential for fraud and abuse, including from family members who are taking advantage of ill or elderly family members, and corruption in the medical community who could allow certification of euthanasia for people who are not eligible. So some sort of a watchguard needs to be established before any form of this bill could be implemented.
And we are getting live visuals there from the UK Parliament right now. Westminster is currently voting on the bill. Let's quickly listen
I don't think he will leave it here, and I'm sure he'll be in contact with the member in charge to remind them. Right, let us move to the adjournment.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. Emily Darlington.
However, the UK has now joined a few countries to allow terminally ill people to make a choice for themselves whether they want to live or not. Dr. Bhan, this is going to be a landmark judgment for the UK, joining, as I mentioned, a very short list of people who allow for assisted dying. The UK has now passed, that bill, and majority has voted in favour of that bill. As a medical, from somebody from medical fraternity, somebody who is practicing as a physician, your quick thoughts on that bill first.
Are you talking to me, sir? Sorry.
Yes, I am, Dr. Bhan, yes.
Yes. From here, good afternoon to you. I know it's good evening. It is something that hasn't come out of nowhere. It's been, the issue has been under discussion for a long time, and the issue hasn't come from any politician. It is a groundswell opinion and a demand from the public. And various people have been in the forefront of this, including some very famous television journalists. And this bill, in my opinion, has been redrafted, and now the checks and balances have been put into it, which are very important. I heard the other commentator mention earlier on the problems that could be experienced in the implementation of these safeguards. I understand that, but the fact that two specialist doctors have to confirm that this is the case, suitable case, properly indications are properly there. That's one safeguard. And then, of course, endorsement by law. I think these are independent people. Where we could go wrong is if, suppose I was a patient's family doctor and I issued a certificate to that effect. That's where things can go wrong. I could be wrong in my opinion. And equally well, there might be reasons for people wanting to facilitate an individual's death. And these are major concerns. I think they have taken into account those problems, and the checks and balances are there. The fact that it is still very contested, because there are some people who on religious grounds believe that ending a person's life should not happen, but in the hands of someone else. That would be tantamount to murder, or at least manslaughter. I think they have taken those. We've had individuals here. There was one infamous general practitioner who it ultimately was prone to have caused or facilitated the death of people, many people, through giving them injections. And when it came to light, there was tremendous outcry about it, and that didn't happen not so long ago. It was only about, I think, 15, 20 years ago. So people are conscious of that. The issues are, one, that a diagnosis has to be certain. And the second, it has been said that this person should have a lifespan of 6 months and no more, which means that he is or she is about to die in the immediate future. And the other issue is this person in extreme pain, or is the life quality extremely poor? And third, if the person is in an advanced state of cancer, and there is, doctors have certified that there is nothing they can do in terms of treatment to improve the quality of life, not to talk of curing the person. And the other thing that comes to mind is neurological diseases, for example, motor neuron disease. We had a world famous scientist here who would not, there was a film made on him, who would not have survived for a year or a year and a half when diagnosis was made, but he continued to live for 30 years. Exceptional case, because he was offered extreme scientific advanced assistance through machines, and he was extremely exceptional. But any person who has motor neuron disease and in a very advanced state is not likely to live for a long time. So therefore, there are exceptional cases where this would apply. It is not for any ordinary person. There are, where there has been a concern is if you have an elderly person and he was not compos mentis, and he was not able to decide for himself, and at the same time his quality of life had become very poor, and then he has property or estate, and they're the next of kin, and they would like to get hold of that estate sooner so that they can use it to their advantage. That is the case that one always worries about.
Dr. Bhan, I'll
And
come
would
back
they?
to you. You've raised some very important points, and I think I will bring in Irina into the conversation right now. Irina, Dr. Bhan mentioned how there needs to be a safeguard in the bill, and the bill has clear provisions for that to prevent abuse in case a person is unable to give their consent. I mean, there is absolutely no provision for a person who's unable to give their consent, and if is not fit to give their consent, a family member cannot give consent on their behalf. But I think something interesting that Dr. Bhan pointed to, and that is the possibility that few people can get well with advancements in medical sciences, and anybody, and a lot of people and a lot of comments that I'm reading online suggest that a lot of people who are battling some of these diseases tend to lose hope. Their inclination towards dying, their inclination towards not living anymore is going to be a lot more than their inclination to fighting it out. In a case scenario like that, a bill that really allows them to die is not going to be is not very suitable to the larger concept of preserving life.
I agree with that, especially given that there are increasing trends, social trends, and also trends within the medical community that seem to favor essentially catering to I wouldn't say catering, but normalizing suicidal ideation and normalizing certain personal choices over scientific inquiry over whether those choices are really made soundly. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of social pressure on people on all sorts of things, including some of their medical choices in life. it's sometimes hard for an individual to distinguish where their personal desire ends and where they feel pressured or compelled, not necessarily by someone trying to take advantage of them, but by social structure and social tendencies and contagions. The other issue is it's troubling that doctors would be participating in such a procedure because the doctor's obligation is to do no harm. And I think for many people, going to a doctor who agrees to administer euthanasia speaks to a certain medical arrogance in the medical community, where the medical community is now playing the role of natural force or a role of God. And you don't need to be religious to be troubled by that, because there's a potential for abuse of power even if you're a completely irreligious person. There's a potential for even multiple doctors to have poor judgment, or not to not to assess the situation correctly. And there's been cases of medical mistakes and medical misassessments, not just for exceptional individuals who tend to live exceptionally long lives, but simply for individuals who tend to live somewhat longer than expected. It may not be 30 years, it may be 6 months or a year, but to some people it could make a difference. So at the very least, there should be additional safeguards to counsel individuals in need and treat them for depression, to treat them for, and to try to run through all possible options before they make that choice. Because if they are feeling depressed, then this is not necessarily, if they feel that they don't have any other options, that could be a factor that is influencing their independent judgment. It could be a factor that could be pointing to them not being in completely sound mind. What if under normal circumstances, had they felt there are other options for managing their situations, they would not make that choice. And certainly it's understandable why euthanasia is sometimes referred to as mercy killing, but the question is it really merciful, or is it just an easier way to not deal with exceptionally difficult life and death situations that are troubling, that are painful, and exceptionally uncomfortable for everyone involved? From an ethical standpoint, I think that argument has not been satisfactorily resolved necessarily.
Absolutely. The argument doesn't seem to have been satisfactorily resolved, and hence the debate around whether it's really mercy killing. Is it merciful to allow somebody to die? We are, of course, debating that landmark historic bill which has now been passed by the UK Parliament. Let's quickly listen into some reactions that have come in.
I have been astonished by the number of people who have been in touch with me to tell me about their terminally ill loved ones who have starved themselves to death out of desperation, something which takes far longer than you may imagine and is just horrific for everyone involved. And this is currently legal, and doctors are required to assist the patient through this agonising process. How can we allow this but not a compassionate and humane assisted death?
This bill is simply too big for the time that it's been given. And I implore honourable members not to hide behind the fiction that it can be amended substantially in committee and in its later stages. The remaining stages of a private member's bill are for minor tweaks, not the kind of wholesale restructuring that we will need if we're ever to make this bill safe. And so members who vote for the bill today must be prepared to see it become law largely unamended. And I suggest that if they do have any doubts, the only responsible choice is to vote no and let the advocates of assisted dying bring back a better bill at another time.
The honourable member for giving way, and he's making an excellent case for the bill to pass today. Because what you're actually doing, sir, is saying that there are specifics that need debate, analysis, discussion in great detail in committee. That's the whole point of it. And if it's not done with properly in committee, if it's not done within committee, then it won't pass the third reading. Your suggestion is, because you don't like specifics, that actually we can't discuss it in any form of detail.
But I would recall to the House that in 1969, Parliament voted to abolish the death penalty for murder. Public opinion was actually against this, but MPs believed, on a point of principle, that the state should not be involved in taking a life. It was a good principle in 1969, and it remains a good principle today.
My daughter Maria lived her life with severe disabilities and health conditions, and since her birth, we were told many times that she might have only 6 months to live. She lived for 27 years. Crucially, Maria was non-verbal, and I am filled with dread and fear for those other people like Maria who are non-verbal and don't have that capacity, and what might happen to others like Maria if they aren't loved and cared for and have somebody speaking out for them.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm somebody who's changed their position. I'm a believer in the sanctity of life, but I'm also an antagonist to torture and misery at the end of life. And so, accordingly, I'm intending to vote for second reading. And I say to those who made procedural comments in this, second reading is a point of principle, not a point of conclusion.
Order! Order.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. And look!
And the ayes have it as far as that crucial bill is concerned, which will be deciding a lot for people who are terminally ill in the UK and hoping to end their life if that is a choice given to them. Dr. Bhan, I would like to bring you back to the conversation. I want to understand from you, what are the challenges that you foresee in implementing the bill, particularly when it comes to training the doctors and as far as the judicial or supervision is concerned, because a doctor will have to sign off, then High Court will have to sign off. What are the challenges do you think will come to fore when it comes to implementing this bill?
I think the challenge is, first of all, the certainty of the diagnosis. Secondly, at this moment, I would say assumption, but the conclusion that this person is not going to live for a long time. I heard concerns earlier on where a person was supposed to live for a short time and then lived for 27 years. Those were not, those were individuals with not a terminal illness. This person who's born with some disabilities and defects, and of course, with proper care can live for a long time, and who is an individual to decide on the quality of life of a person. These are the difficulties. I mentioned that earlier, I repeat those things. But the safeguards, this is not a doctor who looks after the person, individual, who then determines that there should be mercy killing. The demand for this episode to be made legal has come, as I said earlier on, from the public. It is not a demand made by the doctors. And most important thing is to make sure that we know exactly what's happening with the individual, we know about his or her quality of life, and we are absolutely certain that the person is going to not live for more than, let's say, 6 months, which is an arbitrary figure. One of the persons who is in the front dealing with this issue is a very famous ex-TV personality who has now got advanced lung cancer. And she is desperately looking for this to happen. When you have individuals where there is no doubt what is going on. I mentioned the nightmarish scenario where a family might want a person to die sooner so that they can get hold of that property, etc., etc. The safeguards here are built in to make sure something like that doesn't happen. So as an individual, I may have different opinions on it. I do see on both sides of it. But as far as a doctor, I am concerned, if I was this patient's doctor, I would not be the person to decide. It has to be taken to two independent specialists, and once everything is confirmed, then ratified by a judicial person. And therefore, this is not something that's going to happen. We used to have individuals here as doctors, very rogue doctors, as I mentioned earlier on, who did facilitate the end of life of a number of individuals. That thing is not going to happen through this proposed legislation.
You know, Irina, I think on the ethical consideration, and the MP who has really brought this bill to the Parliament said that, let's be clear, we're not talking about a choice between life or death. We are talking about giving people a choice about how to die. It's not really whether they want to live or not want to live. They want to die. We're giving them a choice. In that context, Irina, does it make it very clear now that the UK is headed in the direction of allowing people to, kill themselves and call it mercy killing? And besides all the ethics and all the studies on whether mercy killing is actually mercy killing, that's where the UK is headed. How do you read this development in context of geopolitics? Where do you see, this bill getting more prominence now in other parts of the world as well? Because remember, currently there are just a handful of few countries, including the Switzerland, and with the UK passing this bill, it does look like this will become a bigger debate globally.
I do think that there is almost a social contagion to this sort of idea, because there is a huge difference between not providing medical deliberate medical continuation of life, and if people choose to not continue, and allowing individuals to take their own life, and for the state intervention. And I think there is a concern that non-democratic countries, where this is not necessarily a public choice, may implement these measures at their own convenience, with a far greater potential for abuse and a complete lack of transparency and accountability of those who are involved. I think setting these sort of examples opens doors in ways that are very hard to predict, because, as I said, some of other countries that have already adopted similar measures have far fewer safeguards and have far broader allowances for assisted suicide, including for individuals who are perfectly physically healthy but have been mildly depressed and clearly not exactly the sort of person who would be excluded from this type of bill. So I think there's a potential for very dangerous trend that may not be aligned with public opinion, public preferences, or medical consensus. I also think it's important to keep in mind that science is always evolving. If there's anything to be learned from the COVID pandemic controversies, is that we don't have all the answers. We don't have all the immediately available information about not only scientific breakthroughs, but even human capacity. And I think that's something to keep in mind, because otherwise, what we don't want to do is be ruled by public opinion that may not be well informed about these potential opportunities to provide other types of care, and to have a dignified end of life without necessarily, putting it on the doctors to put an end to someone's existence. I think this is a very significant moral choice for the doctor, which also needs to be taken into account.
All right, a significant moral choice that needs to be taken into account. But as far as the UK is concerned, the bill has now been passed. Irina Sukuman, Dr. G.L. Bhan, thank you very much, the two of you, for taking time out to join us on the show. Now.